A quick disclaimer. The images and clips in the video aren't entirely historically accurate. Their only purpose is to give a visual aid of the events that occurred within history. So while the audio is highly accurate and well-researched, the visuals are for illustrative purposes only. Okay, let's begin.
Julius Caesar, the last of the Republican rulers and a mountain amongst men. A brilliant general, politician, and statesman of the late Republic who crushed his enemies in battle and seduced the wives of his rivals in the Senate. To his friends and admirers, he was a colossal figure standing head above all others, but to his detractors, he was the Queen of Bithynia, a king's hoe. Regardless, all agree he was the mightiest of the Julia, and today we regard him as the mightiest of the Romans. For there is no one that can think of Rome without the name Julius Caesar running across their minds. So on this day, we will delve into the first video of the series on Julius Caesar's life to unveil the story behind the most memorable man in Roman history, starting with his early life and ending with his death on the Ides of March. It must be noted that the primary source of information for this video came from the book Caesar, Life of a Colossus by Adrian Goldsworthy. A link to where you may purchase the book will be in the description below. Timeline between 100 to 90 BC. His story begins on the 13th of July, 100 BC. On this day, Julius Caesar was born into the noble house of the Julia, a noble family that had their ancestry connected to the founding fathers of Rome. However, although they were patricians, they weren't nearly as wealthy or as influential as other patrician families, for they had fallen on hard times over the years and were a shadow of what they once were. At the time of his birth, the Roman Republic was already arguably the most dominant force in the Mediterranean and was in all intents and purposes an empire, though not in name, as there was no emperor. Yet, it had conquered pretty much almost every region worth conquering and was indeed a seemingly unstoppable military powerhouse. However, Rome wasn't as united as it seems to us today, as it was a patchwork of provinces, each having their own customs and even languages, despite all being connected to the central power of Rome. Each province had a governor that was appointed by and reported back to Rome, charged with governing and extracting taxes to send back to Rome. These governors had the ability to enrich themselves within their provinces. Having been able to enrich themselves, they could now verge for higher offices at Rome and possibly rise to the highest office of consul, even to a position whereby they could march on Rome themselves to seize ultimate power. And such a situation will occur approximately 3 times in Caesar's lifetime, one involving one Sulla, one involving one Marius, and the last, Caesar himself. Timeline between 90 to 73 BC. Caesar became the head of the family after the unexpected death of his father when he was merely 16 years of age. His father reportedly collapsed suddenly one morning while he was putting on his shoes. Caesar at this point was already considered a man even though he was just 16, and so had to carry himself alike. As expected by custom, he put away his good luck charm necklace that he had as a boy, which was expected to keep him safe. He also cut his hair short and shaved, which was a look adorned by matured men. However, he went several steps further to separate himself from his peers, even in the way he dressed, and he would carry on in such mannerisms throughout his life. Though Caesar, even at this point, was a confident and well-presented man, he had limitations in his rise as a prominent politician, due to 2 factors: his relatively lacking presence in politics at this point of his life, and his family's alliance to Gaius Marius, a plebeian man of the people who also happened to be Caesar's uncle. This was because of Marius's enemy Lucius Cornelius Sulla, a very powerful politician and patrician with whom Marius shared a bitter rivalry that would end in civil war. Marius elected Caesar to the office of the Flamen Dialis, the high priest of Jupiter, just a year after his father's death, which was a huge honor, but also a major factor that prevented Caesar from being able to engage in politics. This is due to the rules governing the priesthood, which made it pretty difficult to engage in politics as there were so many limitations Caesar had to follow. This title was later stripped away from him, however, on 82 BC by Sulla, who was now the Roman dictator after winning against Marius twice. Sulla's first victory made Marius flee for his life and was subsequently declared a public enemy by Sulla, and the second defeat was more indirect as it wasn't against Marius himself, because as previously stated, he had fled. It was against his son, also known as Marius, and their allies, leading to an engagement that climaxed at the Battle of the Colline Gate, where Sulla, even though he almost lost his life, somehow came out of it victorious. Another unfortunate turnout for the elderly Marius was that the second defeat occurred after his death from natural causes. This was prior to his return from exile and recapture of Rome at the old age of 70, while Sulla was on campaign against Mithridates in the First Mithridatic War. Let's just quickly go on a tangent to clarify a possible confusion. The civil war between Marius the Elder and Sulla, which saw Marius flee to the ruins of Carthage in Africa, came first and was considered Sulla's first civil war. Then shortly after, Sulla went to campaign in Pontus, the kingdom of Mithridates in Greece, which allowed enough time for Marius the Elder to come back from exile and undo every change which Sulla made before he left for Greece. Then Marius, being in his 70s, dies in one of the most anticlimactic showdowns in history before he could clash with Sulla for the second time. His son, Marius the Younger, goes on to wage the war that his father could no longer fight due to the condition of him being slightly dead. Alongside his father's allies, Marius the Younger went on to challenge Sulla after he returned from Greece. This leads to what is known as Sulla's Second Civil War, which, as previously stated, climaxed at the Battle of the Colline Gate. When the war at the Colline Gate was lost, Marius the Younger decided to commit suicide instead of being captured. Nonetheless, his head was later sent to Sulla. Now, all this is a brief summary, as I deliberately left out the impact of powerful figures like Cinna to save time. For though the Sulla civil wars are fascinating topics, I would have to talk about it in detail in some other video, as Caesar is the focus, and this entire segue was just for context. As Sulla at this point was the winner of the civil war, it's fair to say he had absolute power in Rome. It also wouldn't be shocking that the city of Rome became a dangerous place for Caesar after Sulla won, as he was an ally of the losing side. Normally, Caesar should have been overlooked by Sulla, due to both men being patricians by birth. However, his connection with Marius, including the fact that Marius had been married to Caesar's aunt, as well as Caesar's marriage to Cornelia, Cinna's daughter, who so happened to be one of Marius' closest friends and coadjutor, sort of made him a right target. Knowing this, Sulla instructed him to divorce Cornelia, for obvious reasons, which was not a bad deal for Caesar, to be honest. For at that time, Sulla was content to overlook the young man. The irony was that a while ago, Caesar had divorced his first wife, a wealthy woman named Cosutia, whose modest family belonged to the equestrian order, only to end up being told years later to divorce his second wife, Cornelia. Apparently, he only married his first wife, Cosutia, to please his father when he was alive, but within a year, he was divorced from her. Though she wasn't part of the Senate class as her father was an equi, her substantial wealth could have been an asset for Caesar, especially for his future political plans. Nonetheless, it seemed she could do little more than that. As for Cornelia, he did have access to important political avenues, and despite that, he seemed to be well fond of her, even though their relationship was pretty short-lived from 87 to 84 BC. So, Sulla's request obviously struck a nerve with him. At this point in history, Caesar was young and reckless, and refused to divorce Cornelia, which angered Sulla even more. This was partly due to the fact Sulla initially wanted Caesar dead before Caesar's patrician friends pleaded on his behalf, and yet this young blood still directly disobeyed him. This got Caesar back on the list, as well as Sulla stripping him of his priestly office, wife's dowry, wife's estate, and his patrimonial estate, while simultaneously being labeled the enemy of the state. Speaking of overkill, Caesar was arrested at the age of 19 by Sulla, but found a way to escape from prison in Rome at midnight and in disguise. When Caesar had fled, his patrician friends still went in to intercede again on his behalf to Sulla. These included his relatives like Mamercus Aemilius and Aurelius Cotta, and even the Vestal Virgins, who were all persuaded to do so by Caesar's mother Aurelia. They pleaded, noting that he was just a young boy who had no ability to cause him any harm. Sulla eventually relented and pardoned him, even allowing him to begin his public career, which was a rare case of leniency. However, he did give a note of caution to those that interceded on his behalf. He allegedly stated that though they may have interceded on his behalf, he may one day destroy the party of the best man. He was also quoted saying, "For in this Caesar there are many Mariuses."